Let me ask you something honest. If you live with type 2 diabetes, have you been told to never touch chocolate again? Or maybe you've watched a video promising that one special bar will fix your blood sugar overnight. Here's what actually sits in the middle, and almost nobody explains it clearly. The wrong chocolate, eaten the wrong way, will spike you. But the right chocolate, chosen carefully and used smartly, can genuinely support steadier blood sugar. Not as a treatment, not as a replacement for your medication or your doctor, as a real research-backed tool hiding in plain sight at the grocery store. My team does one thing. We read published metabolic and nutrition research and translate it into plain language for real people. No hype, no fairy tales. And the science here genuinely caught us off guard. A 2022 randomized controlled trial published in the journal Diabetic, led by researchers at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, found that among participants at high cardiovascular risk, many of whom had metabolic dysfunction, higher flavanol intake was associated with meaningfully improved insulin sensitivity, a compound found most densely in cocoa. Not a supplement, not a drug, cocoa. Before we go any further, drop your age in the comments right now. I read them all, and it genuinely shapes the videos I make next. Because what your metabolism does with cocoa flavanols at 58 is not the same as what it does at 72. Today, I'll walk you through 5 chocolate choices ranked from a solid, dependable starting point all the way to the single most powerful approach the clinical research points toward. And that number 1, it is not a brand, it is not a percentage on a wrapper. It is a method. A way of using chocolate that researchers have tested directly in people with diabetes and prediabetes. The results are why you'll want to stay to the very end. Let's begin with number 5. Number 5, dark chocolate at 70% cocoa or higher. This is the dependable starting point. Not exciting, not exotic, just the most straightforward way to get the compounds that matter into your day without overcomplicating anything. Here's the mechanism in plain English. Dark chocolate at 70% cocoa or above is dense in a class of plant compounds called flavanols, specifically epicatechin. Epicatechin activates a pathway in your muscle and liver cells that improves how efficiently they respond to insulin. When your cells respond to insulin more efficiently, glucose gets cleared from your bloodstream faster after a meal. Less lingering glucose means a lower, shorter post-meal spike. The fat in dark chocolate, mostly stearic acid, also slows digestion, which further flattens the glucose curve. So the cocoa compounds and the fat structure are working in the same direction. The research is specific. A 2017 randomized controlled trial by Rostami and colleagues, published in the British Journal of Nutrition, gave women with prediabetes either high flavanol dark chocolate or a low flavanol controlled chocolate daily for 8 weeks. The high flavanol group saw a statistically significant reduction in fasting blood sugar and insulin resistance scores compared with the control group. 8 weeks, one small daily portion. Here's an illustrative example. A composite, not a real patient, but drawn from patterns in the research. Picture someone like George, 67, a retired postal worker from the Midwest who had been managing type 2 diabetes for 4 years. His evening habit was a handful of sweetened, chocolate-covered peanuts while watching the news. He didn't quit the habit, he swapped the product. 1 square, sometimes 2, of a 72% dark chocolate bar instead. Same time of evening, same ritual, no willpower drama. His post-dinner readings, which had been creeping, settled into a range he hadn't seen in over a year. Small swap, real outcome. The age angle matters here. After 60, the proteins that shuttle glucose into muscle cells, called GLUT4 transporters, become less responsive. Epicatechin directly supports the signaling pathway that activates those transporters. So the older you are, the more targeted this benefit actually becomes. Start today for almost nothing. At your next grocery run, pick up 1 bar of dark chocolate at 70% cocoa or above. Read the label. Sugar should not be the first ingredient. Aim for 1 to 2 small squares with or just after your largest meal. That's it. Synergy tip. Dark chocolate is powerful on its own, but there's a form of cocoa that delivers the same compounds with almost none of the sugar and fat, and it opens up uses that a solid bar simply can't. That's number 4, and it's coming up next. Number 4, unsweetened cocoa powder. This is the option that surprises people the most, and it earns that reaction. Here's how it differs from a bar chocolate. When you eat dark chocolate, the cocoa flavonols arrive in your digestive system embedded in cocoa butter and some sugar. That fat matrix slows absorption, which is partly why dark chocolate flattens the glucose curve. Unsweetened cocoa powder strips that fat layer away almost entirely. What you're left with is a far more concentrated dose of flavonols, roughly 2 to 3 times the flavonol content per gram compared to most dark chocolate bars, with negligible sugar and almost no fat buffer. The flavonols are more bioavailable, meaning your gut absorbs them faster and more completely. That difference has measurable consequences. A 2013 randomized controlled trial by Grassi and colleagues, published in the British Journal of Nutrition, found that cocoa flavanol supplementation improved endothelial function and insulin sensitivity in hypertensive, overweight adults, a population that closely mirrors many people managing type 2 diabetes. The improvements were dose-dependent, meaning more flavanols produced more effect, within a reasonable range. Here's a composite example. Think of someone like Lorraine, 71, a retired school administrator who had given up her morning hot chocolate years ago on her doctor's advice because of the sugar. She didn't know that unsweetened cocoa powder was an entirely different product. She started stirring a teaspoon of pure unsweetened cocoa into her morning oatmeal, no sweetener added. Same breakfast, no extra sugar, a dense hit of flavonols before 9 a.m. Her cardiologist noticed her fasting numbers trending calmer at her next quarterly visit. The age-specific insight here is different from number 5's. After 65, chronic low-grade inflammation becomes a larger driver of insulin resistance, separate from the GLUT4 issue we discussed. Cocoa flavanols have well-documented anti-inflammatory effects, specifically on a marker called C-reactive protein. Targeting inflammation is an entirely different mechanism, which is why cocoa powder and dark chocolate can work together rather than just overlapping. Start today for almost nothing. A tin of plain, unsweetened cocoa powder costs about $3 and lasts for weeks. Stir 1 level teaspoon into oatmeal, a warm, unsweetened drink, or plain Greek yogurt. Look for the word unsweetened on the label and nothing else. No Dutch processing if you can find it, as that process reduces flavanol content. Synergy tip. Cocoa powder gives you the compound. But what if there were a form that delivered those same flavonols with almost zero processing, no added fat, and the ability to eat it straight? There is, and most people with diabetes have never considered it. That's number 3, and it changes how you think about snacking entirely. Number 3, cacao nibs. This one surprises people the most, and once you understand why it belongs here, you won't look at your snack drawer the same way again. First, let's be precise about what cacao nibs actually are, because they are not just a crunchy version of dark chocolate. A cacao nib is the raw, crushed inner seed of the cacao bean, before roasting, before grinding into paste, before any sugar or fat is added. Dark chocolate is a processed product built around cocoa. A nib is the source itself. That distinction matters mechanically. The roasting process used to make cocoa powder and chocolate reduces flavanol content by anywhere from 40 to 90%, depending on temperature and duration. Nibs skip that step almost entirely. What you are eating is one of the most flavanol-dense foods that exists in any grocery store in its least processed form. The research reflects that density. A 2008 study by Grassi and colleagues published in the journal Nutrition found that high flavanol cocoa consumption over 15 days significantly improved insulin sensitivity in healthy but insulin-resistant adults, with fasting insulin dropping by a clinically meaningful margin. The flavanol doses used in that study are achievable with a modest daily serving of raw cacao nibs, without the sugar load that comes with most chocolate products. Here's a composite example drawn from recognizable patterns. Picture someone like Patricia, 63, a retired nurse from the Southeast who had managed prediabetes for 3 years. Her problem wasn't meals. She had those reasonably well organized. Her problem was the gap between dinner and bed. She'd graze, crackers, a small cookie, whatever was within reach. Every one of those snacks sent her readings up right before her least active hours of the day. She didn't try to eliminate the snacking habit. She replaced the crackers with a small palmful of cacao nibs, sometimes stirred into a tablespoon of almond butter. Bitter, crunchy, slow to eat. The post-dinner grazing continued, but the spike stopped following it the same way. The age insight here is separate from what we covered earlier. After 60, the liver's ability to suppress glucose production overnight, a process called hepatic glucose output, becomes less reliable. The result is that what you eat in the 2 hours before sleep has a disproportionate effect on your fasting reading the next morning. Cacao nibs eaten as a late evening snack replacement deliver flavanols precisely in the window when steadying that overnight baseline matters most. Start today for almost no cost. A small bag of raw cacao nibs is available at most health food stores and online for around $5 to $7. Start with 1 tablespoon. They are bitter and take getting used to. Add them to yogurt, oatmeal, or eat them plain alongside something with healthy fat to slow absorption further. Synergy tip. Nibs are the purest delivery of the compound. But what if the biggest blood sugar benefit came not from the cocoa alone, but from what you eat it with? Number 2 is the entry that takes everything we've covered and multiplies it, not by changing the chocolate, but by changing the company it keeps. Number 2, the pairing approach. For most people with type 2 diabetes, this is the most practical, sustainable entry on the entire list because it doesn't ask you to choose a single product. It asks you to think about combination. Here's the mechanism. Blood sugar spikes are not caused by one food in isolation. They are caused by the speed at which glucose enters your bloodstream. When you eat cocoa or dark chocolate alongside foods that slow gastric emptying and blunt the glucose curve, specifically nuts, oats, or a protein source like plain Greek yogurt, the combined effect on post-meal glucose is measurably greater than either food alone. Nuts contribute healthy fats that delay stomach emptying. Oats contribute soluble fiber that physically traps glucose in the gut. Protein triggers early insulin signaling. Cocoa flavanols improve how efficiently cells respond to that insulin signal. Each mechanism is different. Together, they work on the same problem from 4 separate angles. The evidence here is partly from combination studies and partly from strong observational data, and I want to be transparent about that distinction. A 2018 randomized controlled trial published in the European Journal of Nutrition found that adding almonds to a high carbohydrate meal significantly reduced post-meal blood glucose and insulin response compared with the meal alone. The cocoa-specific synergy is supported by the flavanol research we've already cited, applied in combination contexts. It is not yet a single, clean, randomized trial testing cocoa plus nuts specifically, but the mechanistic case is solid, and it's the direction the research is pointing. Here's a composite example. Think of someone like Bernard, 68, a retired engineer who loved his mid-morning snack, but hated the 11 a.m. energy crash that followed it. He used to eat a cereal bar. He switched to a small bowl of plain oats with a teaspoon of unsweetened cocoa stirred in, a handful of walnuts on top, and nothing added for sweetness. Same hunger satisfied, same ritual, a completely different metabolic outcome. His energy through the late morning steadied in a way that felt different within the first week. The age-specific angle here touches something different from anything we've covered. After 65, overnight inflammation, driven by post-dinner glucose spikes, directly accelerates the loss of lean muscle mass. Protein in that pairing, the yogurt, the nuts, does double duty. It blunts the glucose rise and feeds the muscle you are fighting to keep. Start today. Tomorrow morning, add 1 tablespoon of unsweetened cocoa to your oatmeal and eat a small handful of walnuts or almonds alongside it. No special product needed. Synergy tip. Everything we've covered, the nibs, the pairing, the powder, the bar, is about what you eat and what you eat it with. But number 1 isn't about either of those things. It's about when. And that single shift in timing is where the strongest clinical evidence in this entire video lives. Before I give you number 1, I need to stop here because something clicked for me while building this video, and I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't mention it. Everything I've shared so far targets one end of your day: morning cocoa and oatmeal, a post-lunch square of dark chocolate, a handful of nibs as an afternoon snack, and that matters. But there's a window almost no one talks about: the hours between dinner and sleep, roughly 6 to 9 p.m., where blood sugar spikes in adults over 60 are steeper, linger longer, and drive the overnight inflammation that makes the next morning harder. Standard advice doesn't touch it. Most videos don't either, this one included, until right now. I wish someone had told me this years earlier. I spent a long time focused on fasting numbers, morning readings, post-breakfast spikes. It wasn't until I read The 7 p.m. Rule by Dr. Chima Okoye that the evening pattern finally made sense to me. Everything I thought I understood about blood sugar management had a gap I hadn't even noticed. This book is for the person who does everything right and still feels foggy and heavy by 7 p.m., who lies awake at 2 a.m. and suspects their blood sugar is involved but has no way to prove it, who brings the same lab numbers to every doctor's visit and leaves with the same advice that hasn't moved the needle. If that is you, this was written for you. I want to be direct. The price won't stay where it is. The author is keeping it accessible for now, but that window is closing. What's inside, and what I personally wish had existed when I was first navigating this, is a 21-day glucose tracker that finally shows you your own evening pattern in black and white. There are 5 chair-safe movements designed specifically for people with limited mobility, built to blunt that post-dinner spike in 12 minutes or less. And there are doctor conversation scripts, word for word, so that the next appointment isn't another polite non-conversation. The link is below this video. But first, let me give you number 1, because what I'm about to show you is exactly why this book works. Number 1, the cocoa preload. Here it is. And I want to be upfront about what this is, because after 4 entries built around specific products, this one is going to feel different. Number 1 is not a type of chocolate. It is not a percentage on a wrapper or a brand on a shelf. It is a behavior, a timing strategy, and it is the single most powerful thing in this entire video. The method is this: consume a small amount of unsweetened cocoa or high cocoa dark chocolate 10 to 15 minutes before your highest carbohydrate meal of the day. Not during, not after, before. Here is why that sequence changes everything. When cocoa flavanols, specifically epicatechin, reach your gut ahead of a carbohydrate load, they trigger the release of gut hormones called GLP-1 and GIP. These hormones do 2 things simultaneously. They signal your stomach to slow its emptying rate, so glucose from the meal that follows enters your bloodstream more gradually. And they prime your pancreas to release insulin earlier, closer to the moment glucose actually arrives, rather than playing catch-up after the spike has already begun. You have not changed what you are eating. You have changed the order in which your body meets it. The meal is the same. The metabolic conversation happening around it is entirely different. The clinical evidence here is the strongest on this list. A 2012 randomized controlled trial by Farhat and colleagues, published in the British Journal of Nutrition, tested the effect of a flavanol-rich cocoa drink consumed before a glucose challenge in healthy adults and found a statistically significant reduction in peak postprandial blood glucose, the post-meal spike, compared with a low flavanol control. Peak glucose was reduced by approximately 0.8 to 1.0 millimoles per liter. That is a meaningful, measurable blunting of the exact spike that accumulates damage over years of living with type 2 diabetes. Here is a composite example drawn from real patterns in the research. Picture someone like Josephine, 74, a retired librarian who had tried every morning routine her diabetes nurse suggested. She had reorganized her meals, reduced her portion sizes, switched her bread. Her readings still spiked after breakfast every single morning without fail. One change. She started drinking a small, warm cup of unsweetened cocoa. 1 heaped teaspoon stirred into hot water, nothing added, about 12 minutes before she sat down to eat. Same oatmeal, same toast, same breakfast she had eaten for years. The spike that had followed every morning for 3 years became, in her own words, something she stopped dreading. The food did not change. The order did. The age-specific insight here is the most important one in this entire video. After 65, the first phase insulin response, the rapid early burst of insulin your pancreas fires within the first few minutes of a meal, becomes significantly delayed and diminished. This is not a medication failure. It is a physiological shift that happens in almost every aging body. The consequence is that glucose gets a head start on insulin every single time you eat. The cocoa preload works directly against that delay. By triggering early gut hormone signaling before the carbohydrates even arrive, it partially compensates for the very timing problem that makes post-meal spikes worse with age. The older you are, the more this matters, not less. Start tomorrow morning. Before your largest carbohydrate meal, breakfast for most people, stir 1 level teaspoon of plain, unsweetened cocoa powder into a small cup of hot water. No milk, no sugar, no sweetener. Drink it 10 to 15 minutes before you eat. That is it. Zero extra cost if you already bought the cocoa powder from entry number 4. If you prefer something solid, 1 small square of 70% dark chocolate eaten slowly 10 minutes before the meal achieves a similar priming effect through the same flavanol pathway. And here is where everything in this video clicks together. The dark chocolate from number 5 provides the epicatechin that drives this preload mechanism. The cocoa powder from number 4 gives you a purer, higher dose version of the same compound with almost no sugar. The raw cacao nibs from number 3 can be eaten as the preload itself, a small palmful 12 minutes before dinner in the evening window where it matters most. The food pairing from number 2, the nuts, the oats, the protein, amplifies the preload effect by layering additional mechanisms on top of it. Each entry was not just a standalone choice. It was a piece of a system that only shows its full power when number 1 is at the center of it. So let's bring it all home. Number 5, dark chocolate at 70% or above is where you start. A real accessible product backed by real flavanol research. Number 4, unsweetened cocoa powder strips away the sugar and concentrates the benefit, opening up uses a solid bar never could. Number 3, raw cacao nibs takes you to the source, delivering the most unprocessed form of the compound precisely in the evening window that matters most after 60. Number 2, the pairing approach multiplies the effect by surrounding cocoa with foods that attack the glucose spike from every angle simultaneously. And number 1 ties it all together. The timing, the preload, the behavior that transforms a grocery store ingredient into the most targeted blood sugar tool you have available before a single meal. No chocolate manages diabetes for you, but the choices you make around it, what form, what companion, what moment, genuinely move the needle. and it is never too late to begin. Whether you are 58 or 81, your body responds to better inputs. Every steady morning is built from the evening before it. Tell me 2 things in the comments. First, which entry are you starting with? Second, what is your single hardest challenge with blood sugar in the evenings? That second question is not small talk. It is the next video. Your answers shape what I research next. If this gave you something real to use, please like it and subscribe. Not as a formality, but because the research keeps publishing and you deserve to hear about it in plain language when it does. And if someone you love is managing diabetes quietly, share this with them. Not because it has all the answers, but because they deserve access to the honest ones. The most powerful thing you own is not a supplement or a prescription. It is the next choice you make and the one after that.